The Matildas are leaving Paris, and Tony Gustavsson is leaving the Matildas. The Aussies' 2-0 defeat to the Americans, simultaneously spelling both the end of their somewhat tragic Olympic campaign and the trophyless yet transformational Tony Gustavsson era. His final act was undoubtedly a disaster, but that won't be TG's legacy. Gustavsson was and always will be the coach that led Australia into its first ever World Cup on home soil. The tournament that had half the country glued to their TV screens as the Matildas took on England in the semi-final and saw Sam Kerr score a goal beyond all reason. The tournament that saw Courtney Vine, Hayley Razzo and Mary Fowler all become household names. And the tournament that inspired hundreds of thousands of young kids to sign up and play football. We may not have always agreed with his selection and tactics, but that will be the legacy of Tony Gustavsson on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, supported by Deploy Football. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me today is Poletti. Poletti, it's been an insane day, obviously crushing blow for the Matildas, missing out on qualification to the knockout stages of the Olympics. But you know, when these coaches leave, usually it's off the back of a negative experience. But we do have to take some time to appreciate the full journey, and he has brought a lot to the Australian football community.
Yeah, dealing with all of this on like 4.5 hours total sleep across 2 stints has been a challenge. I think. Like, we all knew that Tony was, like, his contract was up at the end of the Olympics. I think we discussed this on Monday's pod, right? That he was, his contract was going to be up. What was going to save him? Would a gold medal even get him a new contract? I think that this is a very natural conclusion. I'll get into that a little bit more later to his time at the Matildas.
Christian Montegan, hello to you. I guess the one benefit of the run ending is that we don't have to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, but I think it would have been worth it just in case the Tillies made a deep run.
Well, it's interesting because if Australia finished top of the group, that would have had that 11 p.m. time slot on the Saturday night. So there was that chance before the tournament. Obviously, that 3-0 defeat to Germany sort of scrapped that. There was no chance of that happening. But it's just a shame that this Matilda side still hasn't claimed that podium finish, because for all the work they've done, they've grown the game so much here, women's football in general in this country, and to not have anything tangible to go along with it, it's disappointing. It's sad.
Yeah, and Jacob Stevens, hello to you as well. I think it was Poletti that brought up the stat on the last episode of the pod, but the fact that Australia have only beaten the US once in women's football. But if you actually go back and look at the Olympic records, the Americans have never beaten us either in 2 attempts.
Yeah.
So you could flip that stat a little bit, but it was to be defeat to the US this morning.
It's a bit of a shame, really, because there's so much hype around this team, and it's one of those things where just got to hope that it doesn't kill the hype completely, right? That people still get around the team, because I've seen a lot of stuff on social media, and I know that that's not indicative of the general population, but people going, oh, that's the end of the golden generation, he's wasted them, blah, 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 blah. And I think you look at the age of most of the players, and they've all still got, another World Cup campaign, another Olympics in them. It's not like all doom and gloom like some people seem to be thinking it is. So I do hope that this team can keep that hype, because it's only good things have come from it, right? We've seen, increases in the number of, as you mentioned in the intro there, Lockie, in the number of young kids playing football, especially the number of young girls, which is fantastic to see. We're seeing funding going into women's football in this country, at least at the grassroots level. There's so many good things coming from this team that, hopefully this isn't sort of going to put them on the wrong track and it become a little bit of a downward spiral.
Well, let's talk about the game itself just for a little bit, and then we can talk more holistically about Tony Gustavsson's reign as coach. There was a big shift in formation. I think I have a little bit of a different opinion to most of you, actually, on how this played out. Caitlin Torpey comes in. Steph Catley sits inside, becomes a 5 at the back, 5-2-3 out of possession. Katrina Gorry, again, just the workhorse. Her and Kyra Cooney-Cross were essentially playing the role of 3 midfielders out of possession, having to shuttle along in that line whenever the ball got switched around, and then the 3 up front as well. This was very intentional. Obviously, we haven't seen this a lot recently, It was a reversion to what kind of the Matildas have been used to when playing against big opposition, being able to sit back and try and hurt teams in transition. Obviously, we've tried to evolve into playing out from the back more. It hasn't really worked, so I think it's probably a sign of a little bit of desperation, but I do think it was the best way to get a result out of this game. No Heyman, again, I say it was controversial not to include her in the starting lineup. I was calling for it. I think actually if you are going with this game plan, it makes a little bit of sense to me because the intention was clearly just to sit in this mid-block that did get lower and lower as the first half went on, but sit in that mid-block and stifle the Americans' opportunities to move forward, which I think they did relatively successfully in the first half, and then hit that 65th minute and then release Heyman and really try and push forward and get goals in transition. So it didn't play out that way, obviously. 2-0, another set piece go on, then a pretty good strike from outside the box, and Heyman did come on and make her impact. It just wasn't as significant as we needed it to be, Poletti.
No, it wasn't. But look, I'd argue that from a game plan perspective, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't like it either. I wrote this in a piece for roundballaustralia.com.au. The Americans were able to essentially just slice through the Australian midfield and defensive line like butter left out in an Australian summer. It was so easy for the Americans to get in behind and
I
attack.
disagree with that. I really do, honestly. In the first, I'm interested in Christian and Jacob's opinion on this as well, because maybe I'm delusional, even though I have had my 8 hours this morning. But I thought that the Americans obviously had a lot of possession, and the Australians were okay with letting that happen. But I thought that in a lot of the cases, and I'm talking about the first half here specifically, when it was going to plan, that there was a lot of long balls in behind that got swallowed up by Mackenzie Arnold and got intercepted in midfield, and they didn't actually have a lot of high percentage, like high XG chances on goal until that header off the lofted ball. I forget her name, the American captain. I thought that was probably the best chance up until the goal, and the Aussies did okay at blocking it out.
I mean, yeah, in some ways, but I think that was it the right approach to just let the US sort of control the game in that way? And look, the US made mistakes with some of those long balls. Yes, playing it long isn't going to work against a mid block because you do just have, well, in this case, the 5 at the back, right, who can just sweep up that ball. Like I said, Mackenzie Arnold, as the goalkeeper, even could just step up and claim quite a few of them. But it did seem like it just wasn't the right choice anyway, because there was still the chance that the US could do it, and they didn't have those chances, as you mentioned, Lockie, right, except for the one header, but there was always the risk of it. And I think that might be sort of what Poletti is alluding to slightly as well, in that it might have been just a foolish game plan from the get-go, because there's no guarantee that it's going to be as effective as you think it is against a team with the talent that the United States have. But it did work in the first half. So I'm sort of one of those ones who's in two minds about it, because I don't think it was necessarily the right approach, but it did work in that first half for the most part. And that's where I think there's sort of that those conflicting opinions coming in, because yeah, it did work, but it probably wasn't the way that they should have approached the game anyway. I'm sort of torn between the two sides.
You know as well as anyone, Jacob, there's no guarantees in football, no matter where you look.
Yeah, that's true.
I think just because it worked relatively well, I do agree with you to an extent, Lockie. It did work well in parts, but just because it pulled off in that first half doesn't exactly mean that it was the right decision from Gustavsson. I mean, you can play a 1-10 formation and go up 2-0 at halftime and get lucky. It doesn't mean that it's the right formation to go with. I think you were asking Lockie's face. No, you're asking for trouble playing just 2 in the midfield, because America were just going to overload the center of the park. Australia couldn't dictate much of the play. Yeah, you're right, Lockie. They limited America's chances to not real goal-scoring threats, but at the same time, I know a point was going to be enough to advance in this group, but you really needed to go out there and show a bit of initiative going forward. I just didn't see enough of that on the counter. And for as good as Katrina Gorry has been, especially in that first game against Germany, we touched on the pod, Lockie, we were super impressed with her. On the ball, she gives she gives it away too many times. Even the last game against Zambia, where it was just a bit all over the place. She does all the hard running, all the good work defensively, but when we just needed that poise on the ball, I know we didn't see much of it in that first half in particular, but it was a game where this US side are vulnerable. They've obviously improved, compared to 12 months ago, but I thought there were a couple of deficiencies there that we could have taken advantage of the Matildas. So, from that aspect, I think you can see it as a slightly missed opportunity.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm really interested to hear what our listeners think about it as well. Like the shift to the 5 at the back and trying to get teams on the counter, it's worked for the Matildas in the past. Was that the right approach, or should we have done something different?
I just think it's weird. Because in the lead up to the Olympics, the things that this team were doing in terms of the way that they structured, particularly the midfield in those friendly games, was completely different to this, right? It wasn't about having two. It was about having as many players in the middle of the park as possible to allow the likes of Kyra Cooney-Cross to drop a little bit deeper and be more comfortable in those areas and have the more advanced midfielders ahead of her that she could link up with, which you don't get when you're just playing a double pivot, right? And that's it. So it's strange in that perspective as well, and it's not something that they necessarily tried to implement in the build up to this, and they were like, right, well, we've got this, break glass in case of emergency. It's something that we've seen in the past, but not in the lead up to this tournament. So that's where as well it's sort of a bit like, well, they're just sort of throwing whatever they can at it now, I guess, and hoping it works.
That's why I added the comment of perhaps it reeks of a little bit of desperation as well. We saw the announcement from FA that Gustavsson has mutually agreed, and it does feel mutual as well. It's not one of those ones where the words is kind of just added on, but mutually agreed not to continue together. Because it came so quickly after the match, I do get the feeling this was decided before the Olympics. I have no confirmation of that, but that's just my gut feeling. And so if you get to the third game and you know that this is it, you're no longer building towards anything anymore, which is what all those games pre-Olympics was. All of a sudden now it's just about winning and what can get you the win in that moment. And so I think that, at least in my head, Poletti is why Gustavsson decided to change it up, and whether it was successful or not, I guess it doesn't really matter anymore. But that's how it ends for him. And there is the underlying feeling that across his whole tenure that this squad was potentially capable of a little more. But let's have a little bit more of a global look at it now. And over his few years in charge, he has had a massive impact. He did lead that team to the World Cup that has made such a difference to not just women's sport in the Australian landscape, but football in the Australian landscape as well. And that can't go understated.
No, it can't. He stated multiple times throughout his tenure that he's had two main goals by Football Australia when he took the job. It was to win silverware, and it was to build depth. I'd argue he hasn't done either as effectively as he could have. But we've definitely unearthed some more players coming through the ranks. The likes of a Caitlin Torby, the likes of Claire Hunt, Claire Wheeler, Alex Chidiak's been on the periphery for a while. I think it's very much like he's done it, but I feel like it could have been done a little bit better. But he's also said those two things don't really match together in terms of trying to achieve both goals, because sometimes you just need to go with the experienced players. And I think this very much shows in the makeup of the side. I want to say I brought up this point last week. Outside of a couple of small names, and Ellie Carpenter being the most obvious, there's really no one in that 22 to 28 age range that's a real superstar in this lineup that can control games, can dominate games, be one of these game changers, so to speak, that Gustafsson's mentioned throughout his tenure as well. And it puts the Matildas in a precarious position because we know there's going to be retirements after these Olympics. Some players have played their last fixtures for Australia, but you've only got youth coming through to replace them. We've got the Asian Cup in home soil on home soil in 2 years. Can you really go into that with a couple of over 30s players and a bunch of 24-year-olds? I don't think so. Like, it's going to be tough for the next coach, and I'm sure we'll get onto that a little bit later. Overall, I think the legacy of Tony Gustavsson is going to be misconstrued, I think, by a lot of people, because they're very much going to go for a results-based analysis of it wasn't good enough, we didn't get the trophies. And as you mentioned at the start, his legacy is a lot more than that. And I think looking at it overall, even on the pitch, his legacy is going to be a lot different. These players now know that they can play these different styles and work together playing them as well. So if the next coach decides that they want to go to 5 at the back, yes, it didn't quite work as well as you needed it to in this game, and part of that is because Emma Hayes has got this American side looking completely different than it was just 12 months ago under Vlatko Antonovsky. But it's there in the system, and I think this, not to go back to the tactics too much, I think this would have worked in a 5-3-2, not necessarily a 5-2-3.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to leave the tactics bit alone just for the moment. Jacob, how do you reflect on TG's tenure as the Matildas coach?
Is anybody else getting flashbacks to just a few weeks ago with another international manager who also finished up a tenure where many people believed they underachieved with the squad that they had? I mean, you can really draw the comparisons between Gustavsson and Southgate, and I think that in both of them we need to be looking at the good that was done, right? In that they've both managed to turn these teams around and bring expectations back, right? And the Matildas now, there's the talent there that we've seen, whether it's in the World Cup on home soil or whether they're playing for their club or whatever, and there's an expectation that they're going to play well and that they're always in with a shout of winning. He's been able to do that, and okay, yeah, he's not won that silverware that everybody was clamoring for, but that's football, and that's especially international football for you, is that you don't get a huge number of opportunities to win anything in the first place, and it's so incredibly difficult to do it that again, that's where the Southgate comparison comes in that they gave it a bloody good go, and it is a shame that it didn't come off. But I do think that the football aside, and which we've spoken about ad nauseum, he's done well by Australian football to get this team to where it is now, and whoever's going to be coming in has a really solid foundation to work on. And Poletti, I do understand your argument of not necessarily having those players in that bracket where they're experienced but not super old, the sort of middle of their prime of their career sort of players, but you can only pick the players that are available to you and that actually suit the team and that are good enough for the team. You're not going to just pick a 28-year-old because they're 28 years old. You want to pick the best players that you can, and it's just the reality of how the women's game has evolved, that we now have enough players coming through that in a few years' time this won't be a conversation that we're having, is that there's not enough players of certain ages. It's only a problem because it's sort of the game stagnated for a bit and now it's starting to pick back up. And I think it's starting to pick back up because of some of the work that Tony Gustavsson has done to be able to bring the Matildas back to a household name. People are talking about them. People who don't like football love the Matildas, and that's in no small part because of the work that he's been able to do with this team. So it is a shame he didn't win. It's the right move to let him go and bring somebody else in with some fresh ideas on the pitch. But I think off the pitch, what he's done for the team has been huge, and we can't really understate that.
Hey Jacob.
Yeah, what's up?
When you're playing football, would you prefer to play with an old, gross, torn-away ball with a bunch of bumps on it, or a perfectly shaped, clean one that they use in international matches?
Well, I mean, the easy answer, the second one.
Well, you're in luck because Deploy Football are sponsoring this episode of the pod. Proudly Australian-owned and operated since 2012, they are one of only 2 Aussie brands to ever receive the FIFA Quality Pro license. That's the tippity-top for footballs.
I mean, that is pretty good, but, I mean, we've got the ball. There's still another problem.
What's that?
Well, I mean, with the season that Adelaide have just had, I don't really feel like wearing my United kit when I'm out there on the pitch.
That is very fair. But in that case, you can go and get your own custom kits from Deploy as well. Fully sublimated on just a 15-day turnaround with no lock-in contracts for clubs. You can even get your own custom footballs. They've got the largest range of program-specific footballs in the country.
Nice. Sounds to me like we need some gear for the pod.
That is a very good idea. We will have to get on to them about that.
Yeah, we should do that. It would be sick.
Deploy are proud partners of state federations all over the country and offer clubs and individuals the best value for money on footballs, teamwear and equipment. If you want to get the best for your club, head to Deploy and let them know we sent you. All right, well then the obvious question is who comes next. There are a couple of names that are being floated around. One, I think particularly naively, is Joe Montemuro. Now, he recently has just signed a 2-year deal at Lyon. Of course, football and the transfer market is an incredible thing. That doesn't mean he couldn't be the Matildas coach. I just think, Christian, the timeline, the way things played out, he left his role at Juventus for a few months. I have to imagine there was some kind of conversation. If the Matildas job was something that was on his radar, he, just like us, would have seen the Tony Gustavsson situation coming up to the Olympics and at least had some kind of an idea that it could have been the end. And then if he really wanted it, had those conversations with FA before signing with Lyon. So for me, that's a non-starter. Obviously, if the FA wanted him enough, it is possible, but I think that's incredibly unlikely.
If it was ever to happen, it would have been during that period where he left Juventus, had that few months off, where I'm sure there would have been a few talks there between Australia and Joe, because I'd imagine that'd be a dream job for Montemuro to coach one day in the future. I'm sure he'll get another chance later on in his career. Obviously, just signing for Lyon, we saw a similar situation with Ange Postecoglou. I mentioned earlier in our group chat. He was at Victory, and I believe he coached about 3 or 4 games, and then the Socceroos had to.
I think it was a little more than that, but yeah.
Was it? Maybe half a season?
Yeah, maybe a couple of months, something like that.
A couple of months, yeah, a couple of months, and then the Socceroos had to arrange a deal to pay out that contract, and that's going to probably be a similar situation with Lyon if that were to happen. Montemuro can come out and say, he'd love to coach the Matildas, and if that's what he wants to do, then okay. But at the same time, in terms of that contractual obligation, it's going to be very difficult to see a way that he can coach currently at this moment. And you have to feel it's sort of it's an FA issue where they haven't sort of planned accordingly. Because what if the Matildas won a gold medal here at the Olympics? Would they have kept Gustavsson on, or would he have left? So I think it sort of pended on that performance, because you crash out of the group stage, you don't really have an option. So I think in a way they were caught in 2 months, whether if he does perform well, it's going to be a bit harsh look to part ways. There have been rumours that Gustavsson was linked to the men's Swedish national team as an assistant over there. That could have come into play as well. So perhaps the Matildas, they knew what was coming. And like you said, Lockie, I think it definitely was a mutual agreement at the end of the day. I'd like to see Juric take the job from Sydney. I think he'd be a great appointment. That would be my number one target if I was part of the Matildas board and the FA. But because he's been at Sydney for a while now, hasn't he? For I can't remember the exact number of years, but obviously multiple championships under his reign at the Sky Blues. I think he's well established and well equipped to take over this Matildas side, who do have a lot of talent coming through with the young Matildas. I think he'd be a perfect fit to take that next generation to the next level.
Yeah, look, as I said earlier, I think the decision on TG was made before the Olympics. That, again, the same as you, it's pure speculation, but that's my belief. So in terms of planning, who knows, before we move on from Montemuro, the other thing you have to remember is that Lyon is one of the most accomplished women's sides in the world, multiple Champions League victories and stuff like that. So just getting that job as a career opportunity is a big move, and that adds to it. It's an incredibly big thing to give up as well, to then go and coach the Matildas. So that's just an extra layer to it. But Poletti, I agree with Christian. I think Ante Juric, at least on the domestic scene, is the absolute standout for me. I know there's some other names that you're more familiar with already in the national team kind of setup that might have a stake to claim as well. But Ante, so many championships with Sydney. He's had that run of grand final appearances as well. He's done incredible things. He does seem very settled in the Sydney. He has a great balance. I know you've mentioned he still does teaching as well. So whether that's a part of his life that he's willing to give up, or it's something that he could do with the Matildas as well, I'm not sure. But there seems to be more things outside of football at play with Ante Juric.
Yeah, it's very much a situation where a lot of people think that Ante is the right person for the job, and I don't disagree with them. He seemingly just is able to pluck these players out of nowhere and turn them into superstars at Sydney FC, and just he just keeps winning. That's all he does at Sydney FC outside of, a game here or there. But overall, over the course of a season, all he does is win. It's, and then there's the player development side of things as well. I talked on on Monday's pod about Stephen Peters and the move to glory and why I thought that was a good idea. And I think a lot of those points translate over to someone like Ante Juric as well. Great at player development, great at player management, great at game management, just all these things. And it's a lot of what the Matildas will probably need. I don't know if it's the right time for him because of some external factors. And also, this is the point I'll make about Montemuro as well, and I've made this point before. There's no real indication that either of them want the job, and there's no indication that either of them would be good. Transitioning from club football to international football and vice versa it's not a straight one-for-one swap. And I think a lot of people, as it relates to Montemuro, are simply pushing him towards a job because he's a talented Australian coach, not necessarily because he's the right person for the job. I'm not saying that's what's happening with Ante Juric here, but there's no guarantee it's going to work. And
is there ever a guarantee though?
No, I understand that, and and that argument's gonna completely not make sense with one of the names I'm going to suggest shortly. But I think the Matildas don't have the time to get this appointment wrong. I don't want to say they need to go with the safer option here. You got an Asian Cup on home soil in 2 years. Matildas will be expected to win that. We know that all of their games will sell out at the very least. Then you've got 2027 World Cup in Brazil, which could very well be the last hurrah for this for most of this golden generation before you go to the Los Angeles Olympics. So it's a lot of football coming up in this next 4-year cycle. You need to get the coaching right now because we've seen chopping and changing in the past at different points because of different reasons. A lot of external factors out of people's control has really hampered the growth of this side.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The fact that the Asian Cup is only 2 years away, that doesn't leave a lot of time for any new coach to make significant changes. And as you say, Australia will be expected to compete for that championship. Who are the other kind of names that you've got your eye on?
So for me, one of them, and I'll go to the one that I think contradicts everything I just said first, and that is Casey Stoney, just recently fired by San Diego Wave. A very talented coach, 20-year career in England as a defender. She hasn't had the international experience yet, but she's been incredibly successful, throughout her coaching career so far. Then the other name I've got is someone who's already involved in the national team setup, and that's Mel Andrietta. She's the under-23s coach. It was a program that, if memory serves me correctly, was set up while Gustavsson was in charge, in part because he was in charge. They got that program rebooted. They got it up and running. They've made it work. She's been the assistant to Gustavsson. She knows the system, knows the setup, knows the players. She's a very talented coach in her own right already. I think it could be worth a shot, especially being involved with the team for so long. I think that it would make for an easy transition, and that she's just a good coach, period.
So we know Christian's leaning towards Ante Juric. Jacob, do you have a name in that list that stands out to you as one that you would want?
Montemuro, no, not just for the reasons that we've discussed, but also for the fact that, and Arsenal fans will remember this, that the complaints that Arsenal fans had about him towards the end of his tenure there are the same complaints that people have had about Tony Gustavsson in terms of the football that they play, right? And that it's, ultra-conservative, defensive, boring, not getting the best out of the players, not knowing how to use players correctly, that sort of thing. So I think that if you want more of the same, sure, bring him in. But again, like Poletti said, it might just also be a case of he's a really accomplished Australian coach. Why isn't he the front runner for it? Ante Juric, you can see why people would be frothing to get him in, because to have the success that he's had with Sydney here in the dub is pretty extraordinary. But like Poletti said, it's a case of it doesn't always translate. Club success doesn't always translate to international football, and some of the things that Juric is really good at, like that player development, that's the sort of visionary long-term stuff that you can do with a club where you're working, week in, week out with these players for a longer term goal. Whereas with an international team, you don't get to spend as much time with them. It's more intensive, shorter periods of time around tournament cycles rather than these longer term over a season type of things, which, you need to be able to have the skills to be able to manage the players in that shorter period of time. Is he going to do it? We touched on, does he even want the job? Casey Stoney, I'll be honest, I don't know a huge amount about, so I'm not going to, offer my support for her. But Mel Andrietta is an interesting one because there's something to be said for somebody who at least has a bit of experience in the international game. And that's exactly what you get with Andrietta. Okay, yes, she's been the assistant to Gustavsson in the under-23, ahead of the under-23s, but that's still more than any of the others in terms of that we've mentioned in terms of international experience. And that's something that's so invaluable. And, we've spoken about how, there's a huge opportunity in 2 years' time with the Asian Cup and how, that's not a lot of time. Realistically speaking, this is about as good a time as you could ask for a coach to be brought in, because it is right off of the back of a big cycle that you've just had with the World Cup and then the Olympics in back-to-back years. You do have that breathing room of 2 years in comparison to what might have happened if you were brought in between them, right? Where you've only got 6-7 months to sort things out. You do have a bit of breathing space, but it is good to get somebody in who at least sort of knows the situation, who knows what the expectations are going forwards. And I don't know really if there's who else is out there, right, that would take the job. Would Rado Vidosic have been an option had he not, gone with his son over to England? Would Dario have been an option had he not taken that job? It's there are a couple of others out there that were possible maybes, but they've got something else lined up now. So I think it's just a case of, look, the Matildas do have to get somebody in quickly to be able to implement them, but I think they've also got to make sure that they're making the right choice. They can't be rash about this, because if they don't get it right, it doesn't bode well for this next major cycle of tournaments that Poletti touched on, where you've got, Asian Cup, and then you've got another Olympics in 4 years, and you've got another World Cup, and, things are coming at you thick and fast. You've got a bit of breathing room here. Make sure you're picking somebody who's going to fit in nicely, because you've got the time to screen them now. You've got the time to go, what is it that we're looking for, and really be picky about who you choose. And I think that that's going to be the most important thing.
All right, let's take a look at the Australia Cup. We are halfway through the round of 32. A big cup set already. Of course, Oakley Cannons knocked out Sydney FC for the second time in the last few years, which is a remarkable statistic. Christian, 3-1 the scoreline, and there seems to be this curse of the Australia Cup now for the third year in a row. The recent champions, the holders, have been out in the round of 32 in the last 2 years to NPL sides as well.
Yeah, so obviously you cast your mind back a couple of years ago, and Oakley knocked out Sydney from a 2-1 scoreline. Again, it was at Oakley, so they got that home ground advantage. And it just goes to show that teams like the NPL clubs can compete, in the top tier level against these high quality opposition. We saw in the first half and right throughout the game, really, Sydney had a lot of the possession, dictated the flow of the game. But Oakley were just happy to sit back, absorb pressure, and then you could see their 3 goals, and they just hit Sydney on the counter with pace out wide. The second goal they scored capitalised off a Sydney mistake in midfield, a terrible turnover, and then from there, Oakley are a side who possess a lot of energy and exuberance, and they can really punish these teams if you get caught napping at the back. I thought Oliver Kubele is one that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in the article with the previews for the Australia Cup, one to keep your eye out on for. And look, he didn't get as much of the ball as you'd expect, because obviously, like I said, they had about 25 to 30% possession for the game, but it was just his defensive work rate. I thought that was really impressive, and just a real workhorse, a real engine in that Central Park. Sydney scored a goal with the penalty, but it actually got chalked off first. The save from the Oakley goalkeeper saved it with his feet, and then he was deemed to be off his line, so had to be retaken. Sydney got the equaliser, but from there, Oakley just kept their heads, pushed down, worked hard, and 3-1 scoreline in the end. They fully deserved it. It's great to see that caliber of team progress to the round of 16.
Cannons go boom. Little shout out to Ross there. That was just a very inventive headline for the piece. Yeah, massive week for Oakley as well. They got the Doherty Cup final, as we said earlier in the week on Saturday night at the home of the Matildas, which actually was where this game was played as well, because I think Oakley are getting some renovations done in their main ground. So
yeah, the ground is copying renovations, so they don't have lights at the moment.
That's it. It's the lights, wasn't it? So yeah, massive win for them. Another win over the Sky Blues, and that's turned into a full-on fixture now. Anytime those two teams will be in a draw together, absolutely one to look out for. Great history there already, and it's great. It's one of these examples of A-League teams and NPL teams combining, which is really cool to see. Poletti, take us to MacArthur.
Yeah, so MacArthur travelled down to Canberra to face the O'Connor Knights. They were at the main stadium, Canberra Stadium, GIO Stadium for sponsor purposes. This was very much a not great first half. Both sides didn't really settle into the game. Jed Drew and Jake Holman were bright spots. Yakalish throughout the entire game looked like he probably could have scored at least once. With plenty of debuts for MacArthur, very interesting to see how Milan Strayovski was going to handle a number of departures in the off-season, some contract expiries, some very much forced. Ulysses De Villa's contract was obviously mutually terminated with MacArthur, and Clayton Lewis is still under contract, but obviously under no-fault suspension stand down by Football Australia. So some very key absences, particularly in the midfield. So it was very nice to see things gelling nicely with Jake Holman. Luke Bratton did not look out of place at all in his first game, with very much his trademark defensive attitude and just controlling the players well. We've got Marin Yakalish out on the wing. And they've still got Chris Economides to come into the side as well. So I think there's a lot of bright spots for MacArthur this season. As I said, it did take them a little while to get into the game, but they've basically been a preseason for a month. First time 90 minutes, a number of debuts, as I said. So gelling the connections that might not have been there last season, a little bit difficult. They've got time. They've got a round of 16 matchup. If they can get their form going, I think that they will be a scary proposition for sides throughout the remainder of the Cup and indeed the A-League men's season.
They've got a bit of a Moneyball feel about them this year, don't they, the Bulls? Chris Economides, Marin Yakalish, these players that were perhaps a little bit undervalued at their previous clubs coming into the Bulls. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do for sure. In terms of the other A-League teams, Western Sydney got a 2-1 win over Brisbane City. One of the games of the round, Newcastle Jets 2-1 over Rockdale Illidan. That was a brilliant match as well in the pouring down rain. And then somewhat comically, and I say that because of Jacob's reaction and watching him watch the game, Adelaide United's 3 over Blacktown City 2 after extra time. It's fair to say you weren't too impressed with what you were seeing from the Reds in their first season outing.
What did I say in the article that we put out? It's what Reds fans would have come to expect as standard now for this side.
Ouch.
That sort of performance where it just felt like the team stumbled their way to a win there, because for the large majority of the match they did not look close to good enough against an admittedly pretty strong Blacktown side. But when you're an A-League club, there's sort of an expectation that you're going to beat the NPL teams. And okay, obviously it's not always the case, as we've seen with the Oakley and Sydney, right? And we've seen in the past it happened a number of times. It's happened to Adelaide. I remember after they won the inaugural cup, it was the FFA Cup back then, they then got knocked out by Redlands United the next year in the first round. So, it's not necessarily a realistic expectation, but it is an expectation that they will go out there and they will get these wins. And they did get the win, but yeah, it was not comfortable at all. Carl Viet took just the one centre-back to the game in Panakikianis, which is his options were to take one centre-back or to bring Vreens along as well, who has only been in Adelaide for a matter of days. So you can understand him leaving him out, but it just goes to show that there's still a lot that the Reds need to do in terms of recruitment to be able to have a full squad heading into this season, because you can't, sort of rest your laurels on the fact that hopefully none of the defenders get injured, because there's absolutely no depth behind them. And the sort of experiment of playing this weird back three with Isaias, Kikianis and Kito just did not work, to be perfectly honest. Panache Medania was used at right back, but very much as sort of a wing back. He was much more advanced than the rest of the defenders, and he was very, very good when he got into space and he was able to drive at the defenders, but then tracking back in transition, in defence, he looked like a winger trying to play fullback, which is exactly what he is. So, you can't be too harsh on him for that, because he did look really good when he was on the ball and he was going forward. And I think there were little flashes that showed what this Adelaide team can do, right? I mean, Stefan Mork's goal in that first half, it's a vintage Mork run, that late timed one centrally through the middle of the box to just get onto the end of it, easy tap in. But it was nice play out wide as well between Kito and Johnny Yull, and you sort of could see something there, but then just immediately that goal goes in and it's like they've never played football again before, and they're misplacing easy passes, making mistakes defensively, leaving way too much space between the lines. I mentioned the Mork goal. There were goals as well to Yaya Dukuli, who had one hell of a strike at the back post. First time volley, absolutely pinged it. And after the match, he said that Nesta had been giving him some tips and had told him to just hit it as hard as he could. And that's exactly what he did. And it worked out for him. So hopefully this sees sort of a rejuvenation in his career, because he went over to France with Mohamed Touré, of course, and didn't quite pan out for him over there. And he's come back to Adelaide, and this is the first, sort of serious amount of minutes he's had in a while. Luka Jovanovic got on the score sheet as well, considering the decent form that he's had this pre-season. I think he's got a couple of hat-tricks in the friendlies that they've played against NPL SA opposition. But Blacktown, they kept Adelaide honest. Travis Major had a really good headed goal at the back post in the second half. And it was sort of panic stations there for a bit for Adelaide, because all of a sudden Blacktown were the ones with the momentum, and they sort of forced the issue for the rest of that second half and were able to take it to extra time. And then it was Ruben Awaratifi, who got a goal late in extra time, but still with enough time on the clock for there to have potentially been an equaliser right at the death. It didn't come, and James Delianov, I think, even though he shipped 2 goals, I think had a tremendous game, made a ton of saves that kept Adelaide in the game, and it sort of was a Joe Gauci type performance, if that's a worthy comparison in his early career. But
keeping
it was
Adelaide
exactly
in games.
Well, yeah, exactly, and having a defence in front of him that wasn't necessarily doing their jobs perfectly well, were making mistakes and leaving space, and he did have to step up and make a ton of really difficult saves, and he did that. So all credit to him, because he didn't look his best last season, but in this game he actually looked really, really solid. So there are signs that Adelaide have something there, but there was the same thing was last season, right? Is that there were times where they looked like a good team, but for the vast majority of the time, they just couldn't get it working. And I do have my doubts after seeing this performance that it just might be the same thing again this season.
Jacob, you've gone in so hard there on Adelaide. While you were talking, I have conducted a VAR review, and I'm sorry, mate, but red cards, you've got to go. I'm sorry. That's a 2-footer challenge. Studs up. You got in so hard on them.
I like that red card.
I was going to say...
Yeah. That's
the first Adelaide United monologue of the season is setting a good standard.
And we're still 2.5 months away from opening weekend.
Yeah, that's right. Football is properly back now that I'm complaining about Adelaide United.
You got to go show some passion, though. That was the feedback.
That's
wasn't
right.
It?
That is the feedback. I'm too calm on the podcast, so I need to get fired up a bit more. So
Very nice. Well, I'm sure everyone's seen the rest of the results. Go have a look at the goals in the Queensland Lions game if you haven't. A very inventive overhead and a wicked one from range to seal off their win over Perth Red Star. If we're looking ahead to the second half of the round of 32 fixtures as well, we get our first taste of A-League full action on Saturday night, a little bit of weekend football. Perth Glory take on Melbourne City. And then Lambton Jaffas, top of Northern New South Wales, MPL take on the Melbourne Victory. And then South Melbourne against Wellington Phoenix. They're the 2 standout games, at least for me. Then you got a couple more all MPL matchups as well. So it's good that we only got the one All A-League. I think we're getting a lot of crossover. A lot of member-fed teams will advance. So plenty more to come in the Cup next week. The full A-League men's fixture will be released at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. Very likely already out by the time you're listening to this. But we're sitting here on Thursday night. We've got a little bit of a sneak peek. They've done this media strategy, 5 p.m. Every club kind of announced their own little game, so we have a little bit of a picture. mid-October, when round 1 starts, we're going to have a grand final rematch between Central Coast and Melbourne Victory. Poletti's loving the fact that there's a Sydney derby in round 1 as well.
Give me 2 minutes.
Have to buy. Go.
Yeah. No monologue from me in round 1.
Your theory is you don't like derbies and big games in round 1 because you think people are already interested in round 1 and you should save them for later games.
Yes, they usually under-deliver. I think the one exception for me that stands out was the 63,000 attendance Sydney derby that was at Homebush. I want to say 5-0 winners for Sydney FC that night. It was like going back 7 or 8 years here. But that's been like the one standout. Other than that, they don't usually deliver in round 1. The players are still getting used to things. They're still gelling with their new teammates. And as I said, everyone's already pumped. If we're moving to this even schedule of 1 home, 1 away, why would you waste one of your big money draws in round 1 when everyone's... No, it's close enough to it at the moment. Like, I know there's going to be 3 Sydney derbies this year because of Unite round, but for the most part, every game is 1 home, 1 away. Why would you blow one of those big money games in round 1 when attendances are usually above average anyway, because everyone's so pumped for A-League back. Everyone is still full of delusion that their side can win the toilet seat. Except maybe Jacob. I think he's the one realist here that he thinks Adelaide can't win the toilet seat. Now,
at least we've stopped him talking about England's chances.
That being said, I will say on the flip side, it is important to make sure that you get the right match in round 1. And there are certainly ways that, obviously you can manipulate the draw to do that. We don't need a repeat of the Wanderers in Perth last season that had less than 10,000 because it was taking place on a 34-degree day in the middle of a Sunday afternoon for television. Parramatta Stadium, the sun just basically cooks that entire main grandstand while the corporate side of things is left in the shade. So fans don't want to turn up. It's striking the right balance with the right fixturing. I don't think it's the derby.
Yeah, look, I agree with you that if you're going to do 2 of them a season, it's probably not the right place. The way that A-League are thinking broadcast-wise, you're going to try and have one marquee fixture in that Saturday night time slot every round. I think it probably would be a good opportunity to have the grand final rematch in that slot because that's a game that is only valuable towards the beginning of the season. It loses its context as you go in. So I can see the point, but I also do like the fact that potentially for a month and a half in the lead up to the season, you've got clear air to advertise this Sydney derby, and there's no games on beforehand, depending on the cup, of course. But you have a little bit of clear air. You can really have a shot at marketing it and building up. And as you say, with the hype, it works that way as well because you're going to have those fringe Western Sydney and fringe Sydney FC supporters that are potentially going to get around it as well. So there's arguments both ways. There's pros and cons, of course. If we look at some of the other fixtures that we know about already, we've got a Melbourne derby in round 2 as well, and then the first Kiwi clash with a K in round 3, and then back again in early
You're not still
December.
going with that, are
Absolutely.
you?
It's the logical name, surely. I'm just trying to get in early so I can say that I claimed it early on.
You got to trademark it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we can bill them as well, get some more revenue. And then we've got the Melbourne Victory have their usual derby and Big Blue back-to-back towards December as well. That's what we know of so far. Now, this draw will have a few concessions that will need to be moved around once we know Sydney FC and Central Coast's fixtures in the AFC competitions as well. The draws for that happen on the 16th of August, so still a couple more weeks. But look, I don't think you can really please anyone in football no matter what you do. Some people were saying you need to wait for the AFC. Some people saying you need more run-in for the season to plan around things. So I think it's good that they just got it out there and they'll move around some teams and some matches when they know exactly what those fixtures will be.
I think the most important thing out of that is getting it out early allows fans to plan their travel schedule when they can get cheaper flights, they can get cheaper hotels. Obviously, there is the potential for games to be moved around, but we know what the AFC scheduling is in terms of its dates. You plan around that and be like, okay, this game may get moved because of reason X, Y, and Z, travel, whatever. So maybe we hold off on booking that away day, or we just don't do that away day. But on the flip side, we know that this game's not going to get moved, so let's do this one instead. This idea of the Kiwi Clash, though, I don't want to come back to it. Round 3, early December. I believe that's one of the fixtures that's not going to have a third one. If I'm
No, it absolutely will.
because
Surely.
I would have to believe it would. Because if it doesn't, I want to ask the question of why is it not happening on Waitangi Day?
Oh, well, that's what I'm saying. So that they've, I haven't gone through all the permutations, but I believe there's been 2 announced, but there absolutely will be 3. So we know that their fixtures for Unite round, they don't play each other, so that's one of the extra rounds. There's 2 extra rounds apart from the home and away. You'd have to think that third one would be on Waitangi Day, and you get 3 Kiwi clashes throughout the season. That just has to happen.
Yeah, because if not, that is such a huge opportunity missed from a marketing perspective, from just a financial perspective, period. Waitangi Day, no one's working. That game should sell out. We're at either stadium. Like, it's a no-brainer. Yeah. Kiwi Clash, Waitangi Day. Let's go.
Sell out at Sky, I'm not so sure, but yeah.
It'll sell out.
Well, one thing with scheduling is that it's like, it's all well and good to be able to do this, but it's like, I think back to Major League Baseball used to have their entire season schedule done by just this old couple who just loved baseball. And the way they used to do it is like Poletti's describing, is like they used to work backwards. It wasn't what makes the most sense in terms of, team travel or whatever. It was what's the best storylines that we can try and put into the season. And they did this for years and years and years. And the MLB just kept coming back to them because it was going so well, because people loved it. And it's like, I think, what we've seen so far, at least, is that the APL do have at least one eye towards what are the storylines that we can try and build the season around. And I think that's really important because that's what gets the fans going. It's what gets people talking. It's easy to promote and market and things like that. So I do think that it's sort of heading in the right direction. It's not just, okay, it's random. That might be the most fair way of doing it, but it's not the most fun way of doing it.
Yeah, and not the most marketable either. I mean, the AFL does a very good job in Australia of ensuring the marketability of their games is good, and that is the advantage of having the home and away plus a little bit more, is that you get some of those marquee fixtures.
Poletti, can you just bring out your red card for a second, just because Lockie mentioned AFL, please?
The Sharon violation.
Thank you.
Come on, there's space for everyone. We know this, right? All right, let's head to some transfer news in the A-League now. In my notes, I have Central Coast Mariners have signed a Brazilian forward on a 2-year deal. I could have copied and pasted up the last few years because they've had a few of those, but they have another one in here, Jacob, Vitor. It's straight out of the Mariners playbook. They've filled up their visa slots already, like 2 months out from the season. They've got to work.
Does the name Mikael Docker ring any bells? Yeah. Because it's exactly the same sort of signing in terms of just sort of playing in the lower leagues in Brazil. And South America is one of those places where there's such a huge amount of talent that there are these players that are stuck at the lower levels because there's just so many other players ahead of them that they can't break through. And, these are the opportunities for them to be able to show what they are capable of at a, decently good level that gets a lot of attention, and is starting to get more attention from places like Europe, from places like the US. It's a really good move for both sides, I think, because okay, it might not pan out, he might not be a great player or whatever, but you can't imagine that the Mariners are throwing a huge amount of money at him to come here because, he's younger. Like I said, he's been playing at the lower levels in Brazil and in Europe, and, it's a chance for him to break through for the first time. So I really like it, and I think it's the sort of thing that more A-League clubs need to be looking towards doing is, expanding their scouting network beyond just who are the player agents we know and who do they recommend, to looking at who are some players that maybe aren't getting the chances at a higher level that they maybe deserve, and that we could offer them that chance, because now clubs around the world are starting to look at the A-League as a place to come and get that sort of talent, and we can, make a bit of money from them, and we get a decent player for a season and a half, whatever it might be. It is straight out of the Mariners playbook, and I think that the Mariners are doing things as most A-League clubs should be at the moment. I think they're sort of setting the marker for it, because they've shown that they can turn a really terrible situation around, right? They're a tightly run ship now, and They've had one of the best spells in terms of success that we've seen in the A-League, and they continue to make these signings that have brought them this success. So they're sort of saying, hey guys, come on, we're literally spelling it out for you. like you just need to follow in our footsteps. So I'd be surprised to see teams not adopting these same sort of signings, because it's paying dividends for the Mariners, and I can't wait to see how he goes, because if he can play like Mikael Docker, like Angel Torres, ignoring the off-field stuff with him, but a talented player on the pitch, that's the sort of stuff we want in the A-League. And it's not always the big names that are the ones that play the best. It's the ones that people necessarily haven't heard of, but that can come in and do a really good job. And I think that the Mariners have potentially knocked us out.
It's crazy to think of the amount of depth in Brazil, just in the lower leagues. How I was interviewing Guy Finkler last year. He's an agent actually over there, scouting some of the youth there. And even he was saying there's so much talent, to be explored. And it's a great opportunity here in Australia just to tap into that. I mean, this kid's only 28 years of age. I mean, basically, you'd say the prime of his career. To get him over in Australia, see what he's capable of. Those are the moves that A-League clubs should be trying to do, and the Mariners have pulled it off well a few times now, and that's another sort of blueprint for further clubs to follow, I guess.
And you only have to look at some of the other clubs in Asia as to where specifically Brazilian forwards are really getting a lot of attention. Yeah. Harry Kewell, Ange Postecoglou, Kevin Muscat's Yokohama F. Marinos, they've had a trio of Brazilians that play up front for them for the longest time, and it's taken them to 2 league titles and a Champions League final. So there's plenty of examples around, the J1 and the K1 as well, that have just Brazilian forwards. It's a very niche target, but it's been working incredibly well because Asia has kind of this reputation of being very athletic, very organized, responsible defensively, but perhaps those attacking players lack creativity, not as good as with their feet as they can be, and obviously that plays right into that Brazilian kind of mindset. So definitely something to look out for. And the K-League is where we're going for our next transfer as well, because Jeong Tae-wook has set to sign, I should say, for Western Sydney Wanderers. Now, believe it or not, I actually have watched a little bit of this guy a couple of years ago for some very weird, unassociated reasons when he used to play for Daegu. He's a solid. He was very young at that time, a centre-back. He got moved to Jeonbuk Hyundai, which is his current club, which is a very big club in Korea. But the interesting thing about this deal, I think, Christian, is that it's a loan. So it's a season-long loan from Jeonbuk. I don't know, we just haven't really seen that before. That is a very top Asian club choosing to loan one of their players out to an Australian club. It's just an interesting deal.
Yeah, you're right. We actually don't see that too often. He's obviously 27 years old. I mean, I haven't watched any of him, unlike you, Lockie, for those weird reasons that you mentioned there. But no, I mean, it's...
Well, that's the thing. He didn't mention the weird reasons. He just said there were weird reasons and then moved on.
It'll take me a while to explain.
No, but is he a centre-back, right, Lockie? Or...
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously with Marcelo leading, that's going to, to fill that void for the season. But you'd think they'd sign him on a contract on a multiple-year deal, knowing that they need to fill that space in the centre-back position. I mean, if it works out well, then he might go back to Korea. I'm not too sure what their plan is there, because, I mean, if it does work out well...
Part of me thinks the reason that it is a loan is because, obviously we're in that state of the A-League, we have to be very budget conscious, that any of the moves that were potentially signing players were just too expensive, and this loan, 1-year loan, was a budget-friendly option.
And it depends what his contract was. I mean, if he still had a couple of years left remaining, and the budget just wasn't there for the Wanderers to trigger that clause, and you can see it from that perspective financially. But yeah, at the same time, if he does happen to turn out to be a great signing, then he'd probably go back to Jeonbuk and get some minutes there again, unless they want to loan him out again, and the Wanderers might sign him. So yeah, there's a couple of ways that it can fall, but hopefully he can perform well for the Wanderers, because they definitely need some solidity at the back now.
Another bit of confirmed news out of Asia is that Mitch Langrak will leave Nagoya Grampus in J1 at the end of the year. That's in December. And part of that press release was saying he will come back to Australia as well. He's talked to aleaks.com.au in the past about wanting to finish his career in Australia, tipped to go to Melbourne Victory. Obviously, we've seen them sign Jack Duncan, so they have a first-team keeper. But to get Mitch Langrak halfway through and into the run into finals will sure be valuable if that move is in fact what happens. Poletti, take us through a quick summary of some dub moves.
So we'll start in Jacob's part of the world. We'll go to Adelaide United. Young Matilda Amelia Murray departs Adelaide United and joins Melbourne City. This is a big loss for Adelaide United. The latest in a number of players who have departed the club. There was that mass release of players at the end of the dub season. It's very much getting close to last one out, turn the lights off, please, territory. Just with the sheer amount of departures there have been out of that club. So a lot of rebuilding to do there. Daniela Galich, who's left Melbourne City, of course, also another young Matilda. She was confirmed as joining FC Twente in the Netherlands. So it should be a good move for her. A lot of the leagues in that part of the world are very highly regarded on the women's side of things. So good chance for her to develop. We'll come to my part of the world now. Sydney FC, Shay Connors has re-signed while Fiona Wirtz has departed. Wirtz suffered a lateral collateral knee ligament injury. And she suffered that just before Christmas, ruling her out for the season. Try saying that 5 times fast. And then we'll go to the club that holds the jersey that I'm wearing at the moment, Canberra United. Nikki Flannery and Emma Ilioski, the 2 latest players out the door. Flannery's club's currently unknown, but David Polkinghorne at the Canberra Times reporting that it is Melbourne Victory as the rumoured club. While Emma Ilioski has gone overseas and she's made the move to Hearts in Scotland. I think this is very concerning for Canberra United. They've got a new coach, but they've lost so much of their star power in the last 6 or so months. Like, you've got Sasha Grove and Chloe Lincoln. They've already departed in the off-season down to Western United. Cannon Clough went back to the USA to this new league that's starting in the next couple of weeks. I'm not too sure on the schedule. Vesna Milivojevic obviously departed with 3 weeks ago in the season. And Michelle Heyman still isn't signed, and time is running out to do so. We know that the club is strapped for cash as well. I wouldn't be surprised at this point if Heyman's not there next season, and that's just a massive blow because she is your most marketable player. She'll put people into seats, and it almost then begs the question of how do Canberra approach this season? Can we pencil them in for the wooden spoon? I say that knowing full well that Adelaide United exists, and I'm sorry, Jacob. But we saw those two have the battle of the bottom 2 last year. It would not surprise me if they're expecting something similar again. If you look at the Canberra United lineup from last season, Michelle Heyman not signed, Cote Rojas 35. I don't know what's happening with her. I can't imagine she's coming back either. As I already said, Cannon Clough's gone. So you've got, from last season, 26-year-old Madeline Whittle, 25-year-old Devon Jackson, and 24-year-old Hannah McNulty as your 3 oldest players in the squad. And half the squad's 20 or younger. And Hannah McNulty only played 3 games last season off the bench. It was her first season in the A-League Women's. Those are the 3 oldest players going into next season. I don't even know how many of them are signed, if any of those 3 are signed, off the top of my head. Like, it's very dire for Canberra United. I imagine we're going to get a mass announcement of signings a month out from the season when pre-season starts. But for now, it's just so dire in Canberra. I saw Marissa Lodanik tweet, like, we saved Canberra, but at what cost? Because that's kind of what it's starting to feel like at this point.
Is it a financial thing though, Poletti? Sorry.
I think part of it's financial. I think the fact that they've got a new coach. I think the fact that some players just wanted different opportunities as well. If we go back to the piece, one of our first launch pieces actually, was Sasha Grove. I think I touched on her move down to Canberra, down to Western United there. I think it's just very much a variety of factors. It's just unfortunate they've all sort of hit all at once.
But I was going to say, I think that I know what the solution is, and I did say it in the group chat, is that Canberra and Adelaide should just merge because between them they might have enough players for a full squad. They're already both called United. They were both pretty rubbish last season. I mean, come on, it's
No,
it's
we already have
heaven,
a bye
right?
round in the A-League men. We do not need one in the A-League women.
I agree.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Absolutely. Well, on the topic of Adelaide, the last bit of news we have for you is that the Socceroos have sold out Adelaide Oval already for their World Cup qualifier against China that will be played in October. That's quite impressive, Jacob, for it to be sold out so far out from the match. 50,000 people in Adelaide Oval. It's going to be great.
We're a football town. What can I say? Everybody here that loves football. That's just the way that it is, and it goes to show that I think Football Australia has sort of missed something in not having the Socceroos come here for so many years, because there's clearly the demand for it. You know, to sell out so quickly. I mean, I didn't get a ticket, but that's because I just completely forgot. So yeah, I'll be watching on TV. But no, it's fantastic to see, that we can get around the Matildas and we can get around the Socceroos, get around the men. Adelaide United consistently getting solid crowds as well, despite, last season wasn't the best season, still averaged 10K. Like, it's a football town here, and starting to get a bit of recognition for that and getting these fixtures in is awesome, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, I think especially with so much South Australian talent in the national team, I look at the Bangladesh game that was played in Melbourne, and then the Socceroos couldn't sell out Amy Park for that. So I balance those two numbers together, and I think, why do Victoria deserve to get more games in Adelaide if that's the kind of response they're going to get? So,
Victoria's the best.
What? Are you asking
That
me
is
that?
so not
No,
true.
because Victoria's the best.
That
I'm
is so not true.
stating a fact.
That is.
No, I was going to say,
You've had some hot takes, Christian, and that is right at the top.
Jacob, I was going to say, you know why it's sold out, isn't it? It's because the fans are crying out for some entertaining football, not that rubbish that Adelaide are producing week in, week out. They want to see some proper football.
It could be. They want to see Craig Goodwin back on the pitch. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that'll do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thank you again to Deploy Football for supporting our independent coverage of the beautiful game in Australia, coming home from Paris, unfortunately, today. But we will be back on Tuesday for you. What is happening this weekend? I don't even know. I guess we've got City Perth, don't we? We were hoping we're going to have a Matildas
A whole
game.
episode dedicated to that.
Yeah, we were hoping we could have another Matildas game, but unfortunately
Maybe there'll be
that's
some more developments in this Canada scandal, and we can spend 20 minutes on that.
Maybe despite being eliminated from Paris, we will win a bronze medal by the time we come back to chat. It's a realistic situation, and maybe it won't happen that quickly. But
Just put the disclaimer that it's from 3 years ago.
from 3 years ago,
Yeah.
the precedent is there, so stay tuned on that. But thank you all very much for listening today. Goodbye.